All right, so you wanted the inside scoop on Mark Cuban, huh? Well, get ready. Because we are going deep on this one. Deep dive time into his world. We got his Shay interview lined up.
Okay.
And let me tell you, this goes way beyond the typical sports news cycle.
Right.
We're talking Mavericks moves, business insights, and even some surprisingly candid moments with Cuban.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me is how this interview really shows Cuban's evolution. Like, he's not just a businessman or a team owner. He's constantly kind of adapting and taking what he's learned in one area and applying it to another.
Yeah, and speaking of adapting, let's start with those Mavs moves. You were curious about how they landed Klay Thompson, right? Well, turns out player relationships were huge. Cuban actually credits Nico Harrison, Kyrie Irving, and Luca for getting Klay on board.
Really?
Yeah, pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes to show you, Cuban understands how teams really work. It's not just about getting the best players, it's about getting guys who actually want to play together.
Right.
Creating that environment where the chemistry and the camaraderie are just as important as the talent on the court.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
One thing that really stuck with me, Cuban mentioned that Klay was really looking for a change of scenery after kind of a rough year, which is a good reminder. Even star players, they need that fresh start to kind of reignite that passion.
That's right. And it just goes to show you the human element, I think, which is often overlooked, right?
Right.
I mean, these are elite athletes, but they have aspirations, insecurities, and a desire to grow, right? Just like anyone. And Cuban really understands that.
Yeah. And speaking of interesting moves, let's talk about that Kyrie Irving trade.
Okay.
I mean, that definitely raised some eyebrows.
Right.
A lot of people wondering, can Kyrie and Luka really share the ball with their playing styles?
And this is where Cuban's data-driven approach, I think, is really fascinating.
Okay.
Because he's admitted that he was a little skeptical of Kyrie in the beginning, even calling him a team killer based on his reputation. But instead of just going with his gut, Cuban actually did his research.
So what'd he find?
Well, it turns out there's a different side to Kyrie. So Cuban looked past the headlines, he talked to former teammates, observed him off the court, and started to see a player who really wanted to connect, who felt misunderstood. Cuban even found out that Kyrie's super into things like world peace, which you might not expect based on his public image.
Interesting. So it's he's always trying to see beyond what's on the surface, right?
Exactly. Cuban knows that personality and fit are important, but he's not just relying on his intuition. He's looking for evidence, analyzing data, and then he makes a calculated decision.
Wow.
And you can't forget, he also saw how well Luka and Kyrie could play together. He saw how their unique skills would actually help each other out on the court.
Yeah, and that, being able to see what others miss, that seems to be something Cuban's good at, right?
Oh, absolutely. And not just in basketball. Remember his early success with AudioNet. That later became broadcast.com.
Yeah.
Way before streaming services were everywhere, Cuban saw a future where online content would be huge and replace regular TV.
It's like he could see the future back then in the 90s. But it wasn't just luck, was it?
No way. It took vision and a willingness to take a really big risk.
Right.
AudioNet didn't even make money for 4 years. This wasn't some quick scheme to get rich. It was Cuban betting on something no one else really understood yet.
And now look at us. Everyone's streaming everything.
I know, right?
His early bet paid off big time. But it's not all about the money for him, is it? Look at cost plus drugs. He's shaking things up in the pharmaceutical industry with a radical idea. Transparency in pricing.
Right. It's like he's taking his business smarts and using them to help people directly.
Yeah.
He saw this system that was confusing, had crazy high prices, and decided to just blow it up. Offering affordable medication and telling you exactly what it costs up front, he's going right at the status quo.
Yeah, and this time it's personal. I mean, he talked about helping a friend who was stuck paying $30,000 every 3 months for their medication. Through cost plus drugs, they got that same medication for just $64 a month.
That's incredible. That story just gets to the heart of what drives Cuban, He's a smart businessman for sure, but he also wants to make a real difference. He sees a problem, and he's driven to fix it.
Yeah.
Whether it's changing how we watch movies or making sure people can afford the medicine they need.
And you know what's wild? Even with all his success, Cuban's still hungry to learn, to grow. He's always looking for new mountains to climb. That live like a student thing he talks about, it's more than just a saying for him, it's who he is.
Yeah, it's true.
It's in his DNA. And it leads right into, I think, a real turning point for him with the Mavericks. He said he regrets passing on Giannis Antetokounmpo in the draft back in 2013.
Yeah.
He wanted to make the most of Dirk Nowitzki's last few years, so he went for the immediate win instead of the long game,
Yeah.
the long-term potential.
Wow, that's a tough one. That's such a tough call for an owner to make.
Right.
You know, you've got this known quantity with Dirk,
Yeah.
a legend. And then you've got Giannis, young, kind of unproven at that point. Really, it makes you think about how Cuban approaches risk. Back then, it seemed like he was all about that championship window
Yeah.
instead of a longer rebuild.
And it's crazy to think about him watching those old VHS tapes of Giannis playing in Greece, you know, trying to figure out if he was the real deal. That's a decision that stuck with him, especially now with Luka Doncic becoming a superstar.
And speaking of Luca, Cuban said something pretty bold in this interview.
What's that?
He said he thinks Luka's already a better player than Dirk.
Wow.
And he's not just saying that because Luka's on his team now. He really means it, even though they played in different times.
Wow. To say Dončić is already better than Dirk, that's saying something. That takes some serious confidence,
Right.
even for Cuban.
It really shows you how much faith he has in Luka's talent. He sees him as that once-in-a-generation type player, the kind who can bring home multiple championships.
Wow.
And it gets even more interesting. Cuban sees a lot of similarities between Luka and, get this, Nikola Jokic.
Okay.
He actually calls them twins in terms of their playing style.
Oh.
Both crazy skilled, super versatile big men who can score, pass, control the game, you name it.
So if we're thinking about that Giannis decision, it sounds like Cuban learned from it. Now he's going all in on building around Luka for the long haul, making sure the team they have now perfectly fits with Luka's skill so he can reach his full potential.
Exactly. And this time, he's not just aiming for one championship, he wants to build a dynasty. And we see with his other ventures, the long game is where Cuban really thrives.
You know, it's funny. For a guy who's achieved so much, Cuban's still got his feet on the ground. I mean, did you see that part where he's basically laughing off the Illuminati rumor?
Totally. It's refreshing to see someone like him, so successful, who doesn't take himself too seriously.
Right, like that line about being rich as expletive and Jewish, but not getting an invite to the secret club. Classic Cuban.
Exactly. He can make fun of himself, which makes him relatable, even though he's, a billionaire.
And don't forget about his little feud with Elon Musk on Twitter. Those are hilarious.
It's interesting, right? You can tell they kind of respect each other, these two giants of industry, both disruptors, innovators,
Yeah.
but they can't resist a little public jab here and there.
Like watching a chess match, but with memes.
Right. And it just shows how competitive they are. They push each other, challenge each other's ideas.
But with his own kids, Cuban's surprisingly down to earth. He's all about humility, hard work, finding your own way. He even has that rule about his kids and drinking, like when your friends get drunk, nobody cares. When you get drunk because you're my kid, you're on the front page.
Right. It's like a funny way of making a serious point. He wants his kids to have freedom, make their own choices, but he knows their last name comes with a lot of weight.
It's a tough line to walk, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't want to control their lives, but they got to be ready for that spotlight.
Exactly. Privilege means responsibility. They have to earn their success, just like he did.
Totally. And you can tell his own upbringing really shaped how he is as a parent.
For sure.
He's always talking about that live like a student mindset, even after he was already super successful.
And it wasn't just about being cheap, rather.
Yeah.
It was deeper than that. It was about focus, about putting his goals first, not needing all the fancy stuff, and putting everything he had into his work. He was always learning, adapting, never letting go of that drive.
And that drive took him far. But it didn't mean he was immune to missing out,
Oh, absolutely. Remember when he talked about almost investing in Google?
Yeah.
Like right when it went public?
Yeah, and then backing out because of his financial advisor. Can you imagine the regret?
It just goes to show, even the smartest people, they make mistakes, they have doubts, they miss out.
Yeah, it makes him human,
For sure.
Shows that even Cuban, with all his instincts, he listened to advice. And even the best investors get it wrong sometimes.
Right. But here's the thing about Cuban. He doesn't dwell on those misses.
Okay.
He admits them, learns from them, and moves on. He's always growing, changing, using those experiences to make smarter decisions.
That's a good lesson for all of us. It's like, have the guts to take chances, knowing that you won't always hit the jackpot. But it's what you do with those experiences, the lessons you learn, that matters.
Exactly. And it's about never losing that curiosity, that desire to learn. Because like we see with Cuban, success isn't some finish line. It's a journey.
Yeah.
You know, it keeps going.
Yeah, it's that constant push to do more, to be better, to take on those new challenges. That's really what makes Cuban tick, wouldn't you say?
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. Sleeping on his friend's floor, to owning an NBA team, to like shaking up entire industries.
Right.
And now he's taking on big pharma. It's an amazing story, but it's clear that for him, it's never really been about the money or the fame.
Yeah, it's like he's got this drive inside him to push the limits, to leave his mark. I mean, he's achieved what most people only dream of, but he still comes at everything with that student mindset, you know?
And that might be the most important thing we can take away from all this. That growth mindset, always being curious, always learning and adapting, realizing that success isn't the finish line. It's more like always leveling up.
Yeah. Always trying to be a little better today than you were yesterday.
Exactly. And using what you've learned to make things better for other people.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's through your work, your family, your community, we all have the power to make a difference.
Cuban definitely shows us that. I mean, he could just kick back and relax, but he doesn't. He'd rather use what he's built to tackle big problems, challenge the way things are done, and get other people fired up to do the same.
That's why he's so interesting, right? He's not afraid to take chances, to go against the grain, to speak his mind.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Mark Cuban, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
For me, it's this. Success isn't some trophy you win. It's about constantly learning, adapting, evolving. Never stop being curious, keep asking questions, and never be afraid to bet on yourself.
And hey, you never know. You might just change the world while you're at it. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.